Imagine everything is taken from you. Not your car, not your savings, not your job. Everything. Your home, your clothes, your books, the photographs of the people you love. Your wedding ring, your name, replaced with a number tattooed into your skin. Your wife, your parents, your unborn child. The future you had planned, the career you built, the country you belonged to. Every ordinary comfort of human life, food, warmth, privacy, dignity, all of it gone. What would be left? And would what was left be enough to keep you alive? A man named Viktor Frankl spent 3 years finding the answer to that question, not as a thought experiment, not as a philosophical exercise. In the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, what he discovered there, in the most extreme darkness human beings have ever created, became one of the most important books ever written. It is short, it is devastating, and by the time it ends, it will change the question you ask about your own life. Part 1. Who was Viktor Frankl? Before the camps, Viktor Frankl was already someone remarkable. Born in Vienna in 1905 to a Jewish family, he showed unusual intellectual intensity from childhood. At 16, he was corresponding directly with Sigmund Freud. At 17, he gave a public lecture on the meaning of life. By his mid-30s, he was a practicing psychiatrist and neurologist with a specialty in treating suicidal patients at Vienna's largest hospital. He was a man who had spent his professional life asking the deepest possible question: what makes people want to stay alive? And then history turned. By the late 1930s, it was clear to many European Jews what was coming. The wisest and most fortunate left while they could. Frankl had the opportunity. He had applied for and received a visa to emigrate to America. But he had a problem. The visa was only for him, not for his elderly parents, and he could not bear to leave them. He stood in front of a church in Vienna, wrestling with the decision. He was young, educated, with everything ahead of him. America was safety. Austria was danger that was becoming catastrophe. Then, according to the account he later gave, he noticed a piece of marble on a table in his home. It was a fragment from a Torah scroll that had been destroyed by the Nazis, broken stone with Hebrew letters still visible. He looked up what the letters meant. They were from the commandment, "Honor thy father and thy mother." He let the visa expire. He chose to stay with his parents. In 1942, he and his wife Tilly, his parents and his brother were arrested and deported to Theresienstadt concentration camp. His father died there. His mother was murdered at Auschwitz. His brother died in a camp. His wife Tilly died in Bergen-Belsen. Viktor Frankl was the only member of his immediate family to survive. Part 2. The camps. Frankl arrived at Auschwitz in 1944. He had been working on a manuscript, a book about his psychological theories. He had sewn the pages into the lining of his coat. On the first day, the coat was taken. The manuscript, his life's work, was gone. He described the arrival at the camp in his book, and the description is among the most important and unforgettable things in 20th century literature. What he describes is not dramatic chaos. It is something worse, a system, an efficiency, a process for removing everything human from a human being, executed with administrative calm. The prisoners were separated, left or right. Those to the left were taken directly to the gas chambers. Those to the right were given numbers, uniforms, work. Frankl watched the selection happen. He watched people he had just spoken to on the train walk to the left. He watched them disappear. He was sent to the right. The 3 phases. As a trained psychiatrist, Frankl could not stop observing, even in the camps. And what he observed he documented with clinical precision. He identified 3 psychological phases that every prisoner went through. The first phase, shock. When prisoners first arrived, they experienced something Frankl calls a delusion of reprieve. The unconscious hope that this must be a mistake, that something would intervene, that the worst would not actually happen. When the reality became undeniable, shock set in, an almost merciful numbness. The second phase, apathy. After the first weeks, emotion largely disappeared, not through choice, but through necessity. The brain protected itself by shutting down its capacity to feel. Frankl describes walking past the body of a fellow prisoner and feeling nothing, not callousness, not cruelty, just the numbed state of a mind that has used up its capacity to respond. Food became the only real preoccupation. Conversations in the camps, Frankl observed, almost always drifted to food. Prisoners described meals they had once eaten in extraordinary detail. Not because they were shallow, but because the body's demands for survival had overwhelmed everything else. The third phase, disillusionment after liberation. This is the phase that surprised most people who hadn't lived it. When liberation finally came, the survivors did not rejoice in the way outsiders expected. They walked out of the camps, and many of them felt nothing, or something worse than nothing. Frankl describes a man who had been kept alive for years by the dream of walking through his front door again, of sleeping in his own bed, of seeing his family. He was liberated. He walked to his home. His family was gone. The dream that had kept him alive led to a reality that nearly destroyed him anyway. Liberation was real. The joy it was supposed to bring often was not. What Frankl observed about survival. Here is the part of the book that psychiatrists and psychologists have studied for decades. In the camps, Frankl had the unusual and terrible opportunity to observe what distinguished the people who survived from those who did not. It was not, in most cases, physical strength. Strong men died. Weaker men lived. It was not intelligence or education. Brilliant people succumbed. Ordinary people endured. It was not even luck alone, though luck was always a factor. What Frankl observed over and over was that the prisoners who survived longest were almost always those who had something to live for. A specific person they needed to see again, a work they needed to complete, a child they had hidden somewhere and believed was still alive, a testimony they needed to give. The people who lost their why, their reason to endure, were the ones who stopped enduring first. Frankl traces this to a line from Nietzsche that became the spine of his entire philosophy. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. The vision of Tilly. There is a passage in the book, one of the most striking passages in the entire history of psychological literature, where Frankl describes a morning march to a work site. It was before dawn, bitter cold. The prisoners marched in the dark, their feet wrapped in rags, guards on either side, exhausted before the day's work had even begun. To stay present in that moment, to be fully aware of where he was and what was happening, would have been unbearable. So Frankl did something else. He began to think about his wife. Not about whether she was alive, not about whether he would see her again, just about her, her face, her voice, the particular way she looked at him, a specific expression she had when she laughed. He walked through the dark and the cold in a state he later described as the most intense love he had ever felt. And something became clear to him that morning, something that he believed no one in the camp could take away from him, no matter what they took from him physically. He wrote, "The salvation of man is through love, and in love." He understood in that moment that love is not primarily a feeling that depends on the presence of the beloved. It is a form of knowing, of connection, of the deepest kind of being with someone. His wife could be anywhere. She could be dead, he didn't know. But his love for her was real. It was present. It was happening in him completely in the dark and the cold on that march. and it was enough to keep taking the next step. He later discovered that Tilly had died in Bergen-Belsen. She was 24 years old. They had been married for less than a year before their arrest. The Man Who Dreamed of March 30th. One of the most psychologically significant stories in the book involves a man in the camp who confided something unusual to Frankl. He'd had a dream. In the dream, a voice told him that the war would end and he would be liberated by March 30th. He believed the dream completely. March 30th became his anchor. That date was the thing he was surviving toward. As March approached, the man grew visibly hopeful, more energetic, more present. Then March 29th came, and there was no sign of liberation. On March 30th, the man became gravely ill. On March 31st, he was dead. Frankl, the psychiatrist, noted what had happened clinically. The man had been kept alive by his expectation. When the expectation died, the immune system collapsed immediately after. The body followed the mind. The loss of a future, even an imagined future, killed faster than the guards. This observation became central to everything Frankl would spend the rest of his life teaching. And then we arrive at the line that is the most famous thing Viktor Frankl ever wrote. He is describing the one thing that could not be taken from him. Not his health, that was taken. Not his freedom of movement, taken. Not his family, his work, his home, his manuscript, his name, his dignity in the eyes of his captors. All of it taken. And yet, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is a space. And in that space is your freedom, your power. No one can enter that space without your permission. In the camps, Frankl found men who walked through the barracks comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They were few, but they existed. And their existence, he wrote, was sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person except the choice of who to be in response to it. Part 3. Logotherapy. Viktor Frankl survived the camps and was liberated in April 1945. He was the only member of his immediate family still alive. He returned to Vienna. He was 40 years old. He had lost everything. And within 9 days of his liberation, he sat down and dictated the book you are hearing about today, in 9 continuous days, before the memories could soften, before the distance of time could blunt the precision of what he had witnessed. He called it Ein Psychologe erlebt das Konzentrationslager. A psychologist experiences the concentration camp. It was later translated into English as Man's Search for Meaning. It has since sold over 16 million copies. It has been named one of the 10 most influential books in America. It has been translated into 24 languages. But more than all of that, it has given language to an experience that millions of people have had without knowing how to describe. The feeling that something is missing, that life should mean more than it currently does. That you are going through the motions of a life without understanding what it is for. Frankl's psychological system, which he had been developing before the camps, and which the camps gave him extraordinary evidence to support, was called logotherapy. Logos is the Greek word for meaning. Logotherapy is, at its simplest, therapy that works by helping people find meaning. This sounds obvious, but Frankl was making a very specific argument against the 2 dominant schools of psychology of his time. Sigmund Freud had argued that the primary driver of human behavior was the pursuit of pleasure, that we are fundamentally motivated by the desire for gratification and the avoidance of pain. Alfred Adler had argued that the primary driver was the will to power, the desire for mastery, status, superiority. Frankl said both were incomplete. His own experience and his clinical observations of thousands of patients told him something different. The primary human drive, he argued, was not pleasure, it was not power, it was meaning. The existential vacuum. Here is where the book connects directly to modern life, and where I think you may find yourself most uncomfortably recognized. Frankl describes what he calls the existential vacuum. He observes that in traditional societies, human beings were told what to do by tradition, by religion, by the expectations of their community and their class and their role. There was little freedom, but also little confusion about purpose. You knew what your life was for because your culture told you. As modernity dissolved these traditions, as religion declined, as the extended family shrank, as careers became individual projects rather than inherited roles, people gained extraordinary freedom, and many of them did not know what to do with it. Frankl described patients who came to him with a very specific complaint. They were not obviously depressed. They did not have diagnosable mental illness. They had, by every external measure, successful and comfortable lives. But they felt empty. They described their existence as hollow, purposeless, like going through the motions of a life without understanding why. Frankl called this the existential vacuum. And he predicted in the 1940s and 1950s that it would become one of the defining psychological problems of the modern world. He was right. Today, clinical depression is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. Rates of suicide, addiction, and chronic anxiety have risen in wealthy, comfortable countries, even as material conditions have improved. People have more and feel less. Viktor Frankl, in the aftermath of the worst experience a human being can have, described the psychology of modern meaninglessness more precisely than almost anyone who came after him. The Sunday afternoon neurosis. He had a specific name for the most common existential vacuum. He called it the Sunday neurosis. He described patients who were fine during the working week, busy, occupied, moving from task to task without time to think. But when Sunday afternoon arrived, when the noise stopped and the busyness paused, they felt it. The empty space, the question that the week's activity had been successfully avoiding. Is this it? Is this what my life is for? You may know this feeling. The end of a long vacation when the fun has run out and the flight home is still days away. The Sunday evening before Monday morning. The moment after a significant achievement when you expected to feel something specific, and what you feel instead is a kind of flatness. Frankl said this was not failure, not weakness, not pathology. It was the signal of a need that had not been met. The need for meaning. The three sources of meaning. The most practical section of Frankl's theory, and the part I want you to carry with you, is his answer to the question, where does meaning actually come from? He found three primary sources. The first source, creative work, what you give to the world. Meaning can be found in creating something, making something, contributing something that would not exist without you. This doesn't require genius or fame. The carpenter who builds something solid and lasting. The teacher whose student remembers one thing she said 20 years later. The parent who raises a child who becomes a person of integrity. What do you create? What do you contribute? What would be missing from the world if you were not in it? That thing, however small, is a source of meaning. The second source, experiencing and receiving. What you take in from the world. Meaning can also come from what we receive and experience. A beautiful piece of music, a landscape that stops you mid-step, the love of another person, felt completely and honestly. Frankl is very specific here with love, and his specificity is important. He does not describe love as a feeling that happens to you. He describes it as a form of seeing, of perceiving the deepest possibilities in another human being, what they are and what they could become. He writes from his experience of thinking of Tilly in the dark of the camp that love is the highest form of human consciousness, that to truly love someone is not to need them or to be attached to them, but to know them, to hold their existence as precious and irreplaceable, regardless of whether they are present. The third source is the attitude we choose in suffering. This is the most difficult, and for Frankl, the most important. He does not romanticize suffering. He is not telling you that suffering is good, or that you should seek it, or that it is always purposeful. He is saying something more precise. He is saying that when suffering comes, as it will for everyone in some form, we still have the last human freedom. We still choose our attitude. He saw men in the camps who were dying and who chose in their dying to be dignified, to comfort others, to use their last breaths in a way that affirmed rather than negated their humanity. And he saw others who, in the same circumstances, became exactly what their captors wanted them to become: reduced, animal, stripped of everything that made them human. Same circumstances, different choice. The suffering could not be chosen. The response could. Frankl writes, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The pursuit of happiness versus the pursuit of meaning. There is a section of the book so precise that I need to give it to you slowly. Frankl argues that the direct pursuit of happiness is self-defeating. You cannot decide to be happy and become happy. Happiness is a byproduct. It follows from living well, loving genuinely, working towards something that matters. When you pursue it directly, when you make it your explicit goal, it tends to disappear. He describes the hyper-intention of happiness. The more urgently you want to feel happy, the more you monitor whether you feel it, the less you feel it. He calls this the self-defeating nature of pleasure-seeking as a primary orientation to life. Meaning, by contrast, can be chosen, can be built, can be committed to. And when it is, something that functions like happiness, deeper and more durable than pleasure, tends to emerge as a consequence. This is not an argument for misery. It is an argument for a different kind of orientation. Not what do I want to feel, but what is this life for? What am I here to do? Part 4. The Question Reversal. There is a moment toward the end of the book where Frankl does something unusual that I want to spend a moment with. He suggests that we have been asking life the wrong question. We ask, what do I want from life? What does life owe me? What should life give me? Frankl says, reverse the question. Life is asking something of you. Every person in every circumstance is being asked a question by their existence. The question is not the same for everyone. It is specific to who you are, what you have been given, what you are capable of, what situation you find yourself in. And you don't answer this question with words. You answer it with how you live. He describes this as the ultimate responsibility, not the responsibility to feel happy, not the responsibility to succeed, but the responsibility to respond to the specific question that your particular life is asking. A mother whose child needs her answers the question differently from a writer who has a story only she can tell. A man who has survived something terrible answers differently from a young person who has their whole life ahead. But all of them are being asked. All of them are being waited for. The question, Frankl writes, is always specific, and the answer is always a life. Not a statement, not a feeling, but a life, lived with enough honesty and attention to know what you are being asked, and enough courage to answer it. Why this still matters. You have not been in a concentration camp. I say that not to minimize what you may have been through, loss, grief, failure, illness, suffering of your own, but to acknowledge the staggering difference in scale between Frankl's experience and most modern discomfort. Part 4. The Question Reversal. There is a moment toward the end of the book where Frankl does something unusual that I want to spend a moment with. He suggests that we have been asking life the wrong question. We ask, what do I want from life? What does life owe me? What should life give me? Frankl says, reverse the question. Life is asking something of you. Every person in every circumstance is being asked a question by their existence. The question is not the same for everyone. It is specific to who you are, what you have been given, what you are capable of, what situation you find yourself in. And you don't answer this question with words. You answer it with how you live. He describes this as the ultimate responsibility, not the responsibility to feel happy, not the responsibility to succeed, but the responsibility to respond to the specific question that your particular life is asking. A mother whose child needs her answers the question differently from a writer who has a story only she can tell. A man who has survived something terrible answers differently from a young person who has their whole life ahead. But all of them are being asked. All of them are being waited for. The question, Frankl writes, is always specific, and the answer is always a life. Not a statement, not a feeling, but a life, lived with enough honesty and attention to know what you are being asked, and enough courage to answer it. Why this still matters. You have not been in a concentration camp. I say that not to minimize what you may have been through, loss, grief, failure, illness, suffering of your own, but to acknowledge the staggering difference in scale between Frankl's experience and most modern discomfort. And yet, the existential vacuum Frankl describes, the Sunday neurosis, the hollow performance of a comfortable life that feels purposeless, is more present now than in any era Frankl could have imagined. We have more material comfort than any generation in human history. We have less clear sense of what it is for. We have eliminated many of the traditional sources of meaning, the village, the church, the inherited role, the extended family, the clear place in a community, without clearly replacing them with anything. And into that space, Frankl would say, flows the existential vacuum, the numbing, the scrolling, the low-grade meaninglessness that can coexist with a comfortable life, a good salary, a loving relationship, and still hollow it out from the inside. His answer is not a system. It is not a 5-step program. It is not a method. It is a question. What is your life asking of you? And it is a challenge. Are you answering it? The last human freedom. Viktor Frankl lived until 1997. He was 92 years old. After the war, he returned to psychiatry. He wrote over 39 books. He lectured at over 200 universities on 5 continents. He earned 29 honorary doctorates. He remarried. He had a daughter. He learned to fly a small plane at age 67 because, he said, he had always wanted to, and there was no longer a reason to wait. He became one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century. A man who had been reduced to nothing had become something that could not be taken away. He was asked in interviews whether he was ever angry, whether the camps had left him bitter, whether he carried hatred for those who had done what they did. He gave a consistent answer. He said, "I saw in the camps both the best and the worst that human beings are capable of. Guards who showed small acts of kindness, prisoners who descended into cruelty. No category of person had a monopoly on either." He refused to simplify humanity, even the humanity of those who had tried to destroy him. Not because what they did was forgivable, it was not, but because he was not willing to spend the rest of his life organized around hatred of them. He had already decided what his life was for, and it was not for that. The book ends with what I think is the most important passage in it. Frankl is speaking about freedom and responsibility. He suggests that one day the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of America should be complemented by the Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. Because freedom without responsibility becomes empty. Freedom is the space in which you can choose who to be, but the choice still has to be made. And it has to be made honestly, with full awareness of what you are being asked and full commitment to answering it. I want to close with the simplest version of everything this book contains. Viktor Frankl lost more than most of us can imagine. He watched his world, his family, his civilization destroyed. He was reduced to a number, a uniform, and the minimum caloric intake necessary to keep him working. And from that place, he found something that could not be taken. Not a feeling, not a philosophy, not a system. A posture. A posture of a person who has decided that their life means something, not because the world has confirmed it, not because circumstances have supported it, not because other people have told them so, but because they have chosen it. Because in the last space that remains, the space between what happens to you and how you respond, they have decided what they are. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. What is your why?
The book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It is short, you can read it in an afternoon, but it is the kind of book you carry for the rest of your life. If you have been going through something difficult, something that makes you question whether it is worth continuing, I hope this video gave you something real. Not comfort that says the pain isn't real, but the kind of company that says someone else passed through something unimaginable and they came out the other side, and what they found was this: that life is asking something of you, and the fact that you are here means you can still answer it. Leave me a comment if this video reached you. I'll read every one. Take care of yourselves.